Well, hello everyone. JB here on Drive to Win. Yeah, I'm back inside the Wynn Las Vegas. It's been a busy week, obviously coming off the back of the Barcelona Spanish Grand Prix. But now I'm here in the studio talking about not just last week's race, but it's a big race internationally because it is the 100th anniversary of the famous Le Mans 24 Hours in France, and that is just in a few days coming up this weekend. Now, I have a really fun guest on the show today, Danny Sullivan. I'll talk about him in a little bit, but he was sort of the poster child of how to be a cool racing driver back in the 80s, 90s. And one of those guys you're like, God, when I grow up, will I be as handsome as him? Will I be as fast as him? And will I get all the girls like he did? Anyway, he's one of the coolest cats I know. And he'll be on the show to talk about not just Formula One, but Le Mans and pretty much life inside the world of Formula One. But what a weekend we just had in Barcelona. First of all, I've always wanted to go to Barcelona. Apparently, it's one of the most fun cities in the world to go to. And when the Formula One circus lands, you could just see by all the social media, everybody had a good time. I mean, it's about great food, great people, great beaches. I mean, it's and everybody there seemed to look as though they were having the party of their lives, especially with the partisan crowd just getting so behind, their two drivers, Alonso and Sainz. It was you could even see Carlos Sainz on the pre-grid show. He was just having the best time. The crowd were lifting his spirits, and obviously the race didn't go his way, but as someone said, it's probably worth an extra tenth a lap just to hear the roar of the crowd. And believe me, you can hear the roar of your home crowd above the noise of a Formula One engine. Just imagine that through the helmet. So that was a pretty cool thing. 300,000 fans over the course of the weekend, 150,000 on race day alone. So it's showing Formula One just globally keeps breaking all records attendance-wise. And it's not just from the fans, it's from the sponsors, it's everyone involved. So Barcelona's on track, keeping the trend of Formula One heading in that uphill trajectory. Of course, when you have to look at the race, you could say it was a little bit boring if you look at it just on the top level, because there are two races, aren't there? There's the one that is won by Max. It's the Max show, it's the Max race. He had the Grand Slam. I mean, he was fastest, I think, in every session. He obviously had pole position. He led every lap. He won the race. And then right at the end, just as if to stamp his feet all over the neck of the competition while they're down, on the radio, he's like, Christian Horner's saying, you don't need to go any faster. And he's like, I've got more. And he just lays down the fastest lap and takes the point for that. So no wonder he was having a good time. And it is not as easy as it looks. I was reflecting on it during the race. You could say, watch his hands on the wheel, they're barely moving. It's just so fluid. It's just so nice. But he is still pushing because that's the only way he knows how. And sometimes the worst moments can come in a race car when you're told to back down and stick to a pace. But he didn't have to go that fast. But I think in a Formula One car on the level, the Red Bull works in that zone when it is pushed to the limit. And as you could see, he kept on exceeding track limits and and he got a black and white flag, which was basically saying one more and you're going to get a 5-second penalty. Well, they could have given him a 25-second penalty and it wouldn't have made a difference. But it just shows the level of excellence he continues to perform at. And he wasn't even apparently aware, as you could hear on the radio, that he was putting all four wheels across the line there. But you could say, why? Well, why not? He only knows one thing, and that is to literally crush everybody else. And the other race. Well, the other race was won by Lewis Hamilton. And it really is a shifting musical chairs on who is going to be the best of the rest. And this year sort of parallels last year a little bit in the fact that Mercedes came on strong around the same time last year. It wasn't a fortune tell of what was going to happen the rest of the season, but it did show that Mercedes had something to bring to the table. This week, though, I think we really saw a lot more about that. The results of Mercedes coming on strong really is the dedication and the work ethic not necessarily more than any other team, but it's the teamwork actually of Lewis and George Russell that is relentless in their approach and how they continue on a daily basis to grind away. And Lewis often reflects on it in his interviews. He said, we know how to work hard. And I think at the end of the race, the way he always credits the folks back at the factory in Woking really isn't just, casual words. He means it. Everybody in that team is grinding away towards getting their car to the front of the grid. And, my view is that it's not just a reflection of that work, but it's, they bought those updates. They got changes to the floor, which, as we always talk about, is one of the fundamental elements to 60% of the performance of these cars aerodynamically comes from the floor. But also they had new suspension parts, upgrades. And as a philosophy, design and engineering wise, it's obviously heading in the right direction. But of course, are they the new challengers in waiting? Are they rather like Aston with Alonso was able to get on the podium in all the first 4 races? Are they going to be the ones for the next middle part of the season? I don't think so, because it's not, as Lewis said, it's not such a move ahead that they can consistently be there. But, I think they're definitely on the right path. And Lewis knows how to dominate too. And let's remember that. He had his own era of dominance when Max was first coming into Formula One. And it was Lewis we saw almost with apathy getting out of the car, having won yet another Grand Prix and another title. And so Lewis has not lost any of that hunger. He wants to be back there. But there was something that really caught my eye. And that was on Friday, they were very worried they'd even get through Q3 on the Saturday qualifying. And Mick Schumacher went into the sim. Obviously, they have these multi-million-dollar sims, not like we can have at home. But he went into the sim in Woking and back at the factory and was able to fine-tune the handling of the car and all the changes they'd made and wanted to make. He did it basically overnight. So when the guys turned back up at the track the next morning, they had a new car setup to put on both cars, and it immediately made a change. And it just really just blew my mind that you can have that level of synchronicity between the virtual world and the real world. And I know we can play on our sims at home and enjoy crashing into the wall and everything, but and beating other people, but they're actually able, with the precision of that, to affect literal changes in the car setup that go on to benefit them in the real world. And both drivers credited Mick a huge amount with that, which is nice to see, because obviously he lost his seat last year with Haas, and now he's playing a vital role in the background and continuing his own Formula One education, which probably means we'll see him back in a seat next year. Team rivalry, I think, I mentioned it last week, but we're going to continue to see that evolving through the year. And at the moment, we've got all these buddy rivalries or teammate bonds up and down the pit lane. And you're going to see some fracturing of that. But I don't think so with the Mercedes guys. They had that mishap in qualifying when they bumped into each other going down the front straight. Because if you notice when you watch qualifying and really try and get into it, because it becomes quite fascinating, the strategy, they have to pull to the side in the way they build up temperature in their tires. And after they've done a fast lap, to have a slow one and then go again. And they really have to be cognizant of the traffic. And to be honest, George was not informed Lewis was on his way, and he didn't pull over deliberately, but they touched wheels, broke Lewis's front end plate on the front wing, and it could have been a bloody horrific crash. Both cars upside down, it could have been. But in fact, it obviously Lewis was a bit stunned by it, but they settled it. They knew what had happened. There was no blame. And that shows to me the strength of commitment of both those drivers, and they know what they're aiming for, right? They know that they've got to get themselves, it's all about team performance. So that is an example of great teamwork. But one that I just thought about watching the race on Sunday was in Aston Martin. Is it going to be, are we going to start to see some, I don't know, weird team dynamics? Because you've got Alonso, he didn't have a great race this weekend. And for some reason they were off pace compared to the the first part of the season. But you've got Lance. I thought he was exceptional at the start, and the way he held off Lewis and had a real go at him, and I was pretty impressed by that. But over the course of the season, his performances really don't match that of his teammate. And even when your dad owns the team, you've got to think to yourself, it's going to definitely bring in some weird team dynamics, because it's all hanging on Alonso at the front. And without doubt, if there were two drivers of Alonso's caliber in that team, they would be really not just competing for overall results at a high level, but manufacturer points would be better. And of course, you need your teammate there to spar with the opposition to, at times, create opportunities, through strategy. So let's watch that space. But I guess your dad owns the team. It's pretty hard to find. And Ferrari, it's just, that was sort of my hollow pit in my stomach moment. What is happening? I mean, it was an appalling weekend. I mean, Carlos Sainz, he did qualify well. And as I said, I think the opportunity at the start of the race to, in qualifying, to get yourself up at the front, we know the car can do it. Charles Leclerc has been outstandingly quick across one lap, but it just falls apart in the race, and it goes all over the place. And you've got to kind of wonder why. And even they don't know why. Fred Vasseur said, it's just down to consistency. We just don't have any consistency. All that money and all that knowledge, they're going to get it right at some point. But how do they keep messing up, I guess, especially on strategy calls, bringing drivers in at the wrong time, which they did during that race to the hard tires. You kind of, you sit on the sofa getting pretty frustrated about it. But it is the red team that everybody would love to see back at the front. So I am sure that we will see an improvement in Ferrari at some point. Maybe that's just optimism. Maybe that's just the little kid in me that would love to see it. But boy, it wouldn't be a fun place on a Monday morning to be with them. So my guest for today, Danny Sullivan, is just one of those guys that really has had a bigger presence in the world of motorsports than maybe just even his results showed. He had 17 wins in the IndyCar series. He was perhaps most famous in 1985 for his Indy 500 win, when coming off of turn 4, he spun the car, got it straight again, and went over the line to win. He got known as Danny Spin to Win, and that was one of the most watched TV moments of all time when it came to the Indy 500 history. Certainly, even back in England, we got to see that. He also won the 1988 kart championship and finished third in the points in 1986. He won in IROC. He's also, he did compete in Formula One 1983 with Tyrrell. He scored 2 championship points. We're going to chat to him a little bit about that. But maybe more interestingly for this show, he's played quite a big role over the years as a Formula One steward. We keep hearing about those guys on the broadcast, and it's gone to the stewards. It's under review by the stewards. No further penalty by the stewards. What is that process? How many people do it? I can't wait to find out. He's also been an actor. He was kind of playing a drug dealing race driver on Miami Vice back in the day. So Danny kind of has done it all. He's a super guy, big in the historic car scene now and motorbikes. We get to see him at all the events. Very pleased to welcome Danny. Danny, welcome to Drive to Win.
Good to see you. It's been a while.
It has been a while. I actually found a photograph of you. I do need to print out. Do you remember it was at that, it was like the Concours they did of motorbikes up at Pebble Beach. Must have been 5 years ago. And I was shooting with my Hasselblad, and I got this really cool picture of you, like draped. You were showing a bike. I think you were actually trying to sell it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just really good. You kind of look a little Stallone-ish in it. It's kind of, you got it going. Not that that's always a compliment, but you look good.
Well, I appreciate you saying so.
Yeah, well,
at this age, I'll take any compliment we can get, right?
We have to. Well, that was what I said. You were the guy in the 80s that most drivers, and 90s, most young guys were like, God, if I could come back as Danny Sullivan, I would, man. I mean, you were the guy.
I actually got that a little bit from Coulthard at when I was over in Monaco last week. I went to the BRDC lunch, and it was just a hoot and a half. I mean, he's a great president, and they had Mark Webber and McNish and Eddie Jordan, and the list just went on. It was fabulous.
I bet. Well, talk about that. You go to the Grand Prix still in an official capacity, or just as a layman?
No, I do about 4 or 5, sometimes up to 6 a year for the FIA as a Formula One driver steward.
Yeah.
Just for most people out there, and shockingly, even Eddie Jordan didn't realize that the stewards didn't make all the decisions. And actually, we don't make that many. But when you see something that's under investigation or noted, we have been asked by the race director, who may have been asked by a team, to look into a certain situation or whatever. Okay. Now, we're 4 stewards. There's a chairman, a second in command, a driver steward, and then 1 fourth steward who's from the local ASN, whatever. And that steward could be a very high-ranking steward in his own country, but he's also an international steward. So oftentimes you get somebody very, very qualified in that position, or sometimes you get somebody that has a little less experience. And then the 4 stewards review everything. We have 1 IT guy that sits in the room. Harrison pulls up everything. We've got all the data that you can imagine. We've got access to like 130 or 140 cameras. Throttle pressure, brake control, brake pressure, steering input, in-car cameras, you name it. We've got the data to try to make a decision as efficiently and as quickly as possible. Some of them we take a long time because we want to interview the drivers or the teams over a certain situation where the decision is not paramount that you make it as fast as possible. So it's very democratic. And by the way, there's often times where I'll have an opinion and I'm supposed to be looking at it from a driver's perspective. And I'll have an opinion and say, this is my argument for it. And I'll get overturned. I'll get overturned. The other 3 say, because there's 4 people that vote. And, typically the driver input when it comes to a driving infraction carries most of the weight, but it's not always the case.
Because you have to, jumping in here, you as a driver, you can put yourself in the seat, right, and go, you know what it's like with those tiny mirrors, being told no one's coming, and you're in the tunnel, and suddenly there are people coming, right? I mean, you've been there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think what's happened too, first of all, you're 100% correct. The vision out of those cars with the mirrors, with all the bodywork, and the cars are massive too. Yeah. And the size of the tires now, it's a big factor. They can't always see somebody coming. The problem is they've become so dependent on the engineers telling them what's going on around the track. And I'm not making excuses for the drivers. The tire manufacturers, they want to save the tires. They slow down. They want to pick up the speed. They're trying to get the heat in the tires at this time. There's so many things going on in those cars and around those cars being directed by the engineers that it's no wonder that we don't have more situations that are impeding. They're in a very difficult situation, but it's also something that, and I know you were referring to like Leclerc and Norris at Monaco, and now that that's out and everything, I can easily talk about it. But Leclerc was so upset that he got that fast. He'd been on pole for not very long. Then he got demoted to second, and he was yelling about that. And they were more talking about, well, where's Verstappen? Where's Alonso? On the track. They didn't see that Norris. Remember, he had the crash earlier, so he had gotten out and late into that qualifying session, the last qualifying session, and was on a hot lap. And then you compound it with, you've just gone into the tunnel from sunshine into darkness. You're kind of looking ahead. You're going back and forth on the radio, and then Norris comes in there, and sadly nobody was paying attention. And when they gave the word to Leclerc, and Charles did the right thing. He pulled further to the left. He was already middle left. He tried to accelerate to get out of the way, but damage was already done. Norris had to lift off on a fast lap, and as you know as well as anybody, once you lift it off, especially on a qualifying lap, you're toast.
Yeah, toast.
You know that lap's gone, and the checkered flag was out. So so it was. So unfortunately, there was no choice left. There was no alternative left to not penalize him.
That's one of the things that is messy, Danny, right? The way they're having to, you hear them on the radio, you're going to do a fast, slow, fast, right? They're going to go out and build up this tire management, getting the tires in, and it's not just superficially, right? It's got to be the core or the carcass of the tire has to get up to temperature to be able to operate. And obviously there are drivers that do that better than others. And it reminds me a bit of MotoGP. I've seen that in qualifying in person, and you go, wow, and on bikes, it's easier, right? They can just pull off, and they kind of have they look like fish going past each other. But as you say, Formula One cars are really wide. They're really long. And on the street circuits, it's almost inconceivable to me that they do that pulling over to the side while they're managing their tires while someone else is on a fast lap, because it shows the commitment level. You must just do what I do and hold your breath, right? You go, how are you keeping it wide open around the outside of those cars, which you knew they were there, but you hadn't sighted them yet? One day you're going to have a bloody massive crash, I think.
Well, I think the problem on the tire situation and the engineering side, the problem for me is I think the cars are so designed so perfectly to run at an optimum level.
Yeah.
That when they slow down, that's why they have trouble in a yellow situation when they're running behind a pace car. And by the way, you want to go around a track in that Mercedes or Aston Martin pace car, because they rotate them with Bernd Meinlander in the thing where he's driving like this on the limit. I've ridden around with him. And by the way, and they're saying, well, he's going too slow. It's like, well, the guy can't go any faster, unless you give him a race car. And even then, you forget that the reason they're behind a pace car is usually a yellow, so they're cleaning up something. So you don't want to be going, Mach Schnell anyway. You're trying to keep the pace at a stop. It's a very difficult situation for all involved, from the drivers in particular, trying to manage all that stuff. And you've seen the steering wheels now, and go to this, go to that, and this information and that information. I mean, they're flying a video game, and they're driving a video game at like you said, at speeds that are unbelievable. And not all the tracks are wide open. Monaco's a particularly difficult track there.
I mean,
but I think what they're going to have to find a way to do is keep I'm not advocating this. I'm just saying, you're going to have to find a way to keep a minimum speed up. Otherwise, the impeding is not going to get less. And as you said, it could eventually cause an accident, which we don't want to, see or hear about. But that's, I hope that they'll find a way around it.
It just made me think, Danny, when you were saying that it's really a privilege, right, for you. You're getting an insight into the technology of Formula One and the demands on those drivers and what they're dealing with, the data streams they're not just the cars are producing, but also feeding back to the driver. I love it when you hear all the different settings and maps. Sometimes you think they're just screwing with each other, right? For the radio, let's go to, strategy Y. You're like, what happened to the other 23? Just kind of, it's kind of mad. Do you sometimes go, I mean, you were a driver in the analog era. You were a driver when you had attack. I mean, it was
had like two buttons, a radio and there was an off-on switch, just about. But again, they're growing up under that level. You're getting that with qualifying and qualifying, especially now for young guys, young drivers in the Formula 3, Formula 2 that are trying to qualify with very little time on the track. They've done a lot in the sim. And then you think of Monaco, okay, there's 20 Formula One cars out there, but there was 30 Formula 3 cars out there, 30.
Wow.
I mean, they did break them up into 2 sections, but, a guy slows down by, maybe he's got a little too much understeer, or he has to slow down a bit. I mean, it can cost you, 4 or 5 positions. And there's a lot at stake. I mean, let's not forget that, okay, Red Bull's dominant, and we've seen that in the past with Red Bull, with Mercedes, with different makes and manufacturers over the years. McLaren, everybody's had their different days. Ferrari, and some of the Schumacher and so forth. But the points are worth a lot of money. And so when you're fighting over, I don't want to say the scraps, but when you're fighting further down that list, with some of the teams that are midfield or back, a point and battling for those stuff, that's critical. You get a 7th and 8th, or a 6th and an 8th, or 9th and a 10th. That's worth millions of dollars to those teams in the long run. And so they're all fighting just as hard back there, and we've both been back there. Okay, you're fighting just as hard, if not harder, than the guys at the front. And I applaud them and those teams, and they're all, the effort that goes into this is unbelievable. Plus, they're doing 23 races a year.
I know, wild, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. The economics of it and everything. It is such a. We forget that that's why the elation to get 10th place, and suddenly it's like a win for a smaller team, isn't it?
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Let's talk Barcelona. I mean, I said at the top of the show, obviously it's the Red Bull show of force, but the rest of the race was very interesting. Gave insight into maybe how this mid-season's going to go. What was your take on it, especially Mercedes? Because second and third.
Well, I think that Mercedes, hopefully, the changes, I don't think they're there yet, because I think Max has a lot in hand. I think the last 2 weekends, Monaco and Barcelona, Sergio's kind of messed up, and I'm not putting the blame all on him, although I would put Monaco, that was all on him. He didn't need to do that at that juncture, to throw it in the fence like that. I don't know what happened with them in the qualifying, for him to be so far down. But anyway, they could have some hiccups as time goes on. So I like to see Mercedes get stronger. I thought George was very strong, as was Lewis. Great result on their part. Ferrari and I would say McLaren seem to be fast, but maybe a one or two lap sensation. Yeah. They don't seem to be able to maintain it and have it in the race pace. And I think if we're going to really see pressure applied to Max and to Red Bull, people are going to have to start pushing him during the race, just not be able to drive it as easy as he wants. We've seen that, though, in the past with Lewis. I mean, and stuff can happen. They can have an unreliability. But I like to see some of the I thought that Haas team showed some speed. Unfortunately, I don't think they ended up with the results that they wanted, but I think they've shown some speed there with Hülkenberg and with K-Pac. Let's see who,
I mean, Alpine, that's the Alpine thing is maybe one of the strongest stories to be showing, right? Because Monaco and now here.
And I think last year we saw some of that from Alpine, and then they kind of fell down a little bit, and now they seem to have come back. And I'd like to see them back in the hunt. And I think Ocon's doing a great job, and Gasly stepped up. So it'd be nice to see. Those are two good, young, fiery drivers. And Ocon's a good racer, so is Gasly. I mean, they've both been winners in the past, so they got the capabilities to do that. So I think hopefully we got, by the way, let's not forget, we got a lot of season left. So a lot can happen, and I would like to see them get a little bit stronger. And I think certain tracks, Montreal will be interesting. I think we've got an exciting season coming. I don't think Red Bull is going to win every race. Could they? They've sure shown the speed. And let's not forget, as the other ones improve, even with Red Bull's penalty from last year and also the lack of they get reduced some anyway by being champion. They're a little bit less wind tunnel and some of the other fluid dynamic stuff that they do. But let's also consider they have the best in Adrian Newey.
Yeah, they do.
Bar none.
Yeah. Really.
And he's been around. We all know him. I mean, he's a fabulous guy. He's not a guy sitting back on his laurels. He's always looking, trying to find ways to improve. And these guys are proven winners. They've won 6 world championships, 4 with Verstappen. I mean, 2 with Verstappen and 4 with Vettel. So these guys are proven winners.
Yeah.
And we see a lot of the shifting, they're talking about, they got this guy poached and that got poached in different places. But let's not forget, they did a lot of poaching back in the day themselves, hence Newey. They took a lot of the engine people from Mercedes engine department over to their engine program. So I think that's musical chairs as is standard. So
yeah, that was great insight. Thank you. My girlfriend said something on Sunday when we were watching the race. She said, so how good are all the drivers equally across things? If you put them all in the same car, it sounds like IROC, doesn't it? If you put them all in the same car, who would win? And it's such a good point because, it's like the race of champions that everyone goes to. And, you have like Andy Priaulx would beat Michael Schumacher, right? Andy isn't known to the Formula One guys, but he's one of the best touring car drivers in history. And he'd beat Michael Schumacher, and Sebastian Loeb would beat, Alonso. It's kind of wild. But when you look at the Formula One grid, every one of those guys in any other form of racing would be as good as they get, right? I mean, you get to see their data. Right. They're all supremely talented. But if you had to line them in identical equipment, what would the top 3 look like?
I think it'd probably look about like the grid that you're there, that you're looking at, and that's not taking anything away from them. Look, Justin, you've raced, all your life and so forth. You've been around with your dad. You've been around it your entire life. It's not just the talent, as you said. Andy Priaulx, fabulous guy, great driver, and so forth. But everybody gets in their discipline. And then even when you get in your discipline, you have to find the bonding inside that team. And that's true in the NFL, NBA, whatever sport you're playing, World Cup soccer, Premier League, all that stuff. It's finding that chemistry that you work within that certain environment that helps to bring it out. And I look back at Alain Prost, for example. And he was great with Ron Dennis, and Ron had his arm around him and stuff like that. But then he went over to Frank Williams and Patrick Head. Those guys were a little bit tougher, and they didn't put their arm around him and so forth. And he didn't do as well as he should have done. So I think that environment and fitting in that environment and fitting with your engineer and the people and everything is part of what brings it to the top. So I don't think that you could just take a driver, and I'm not going to use a name, but in a mid-pack car or last car, and put him automatically up to Red Bull or Mercedes, and he wouldn't necessarily go out and beat Max or beat Lewis. We forget that part of the reason that George did so well when he replaced Lewis in Bahrain, when he had I think he had COVID, and he replaced him in that. What we forget that George was a test driver for Mercedes. So when they did a lot of the preseason testing at Barcelona and all that, he would be the driver for the 3rd day. So he was already comfortable in the car, comfortable with the team. They all knew each other, everything like that. So it was just like sliding over to, another team. Yeah. It was just completely different for him. But I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but I don't think you could take K-Mag and put him in the Red Bull, and the first day he'd be right there on top of the sheet. Okay, would he figure it out? Would he work his way into it? Yes, but I don't think it's an easy transition. And so I think that's why the Race of Champions is such a good format. and how many different cars do they, or vehicles, because they're not all cars, but
like 3, right?
they do the buggies and different, they drive 3 or 4 different vehicles, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just favor the rally driver, and it doesn't just favor the road guy. Yeah.
Exactly. And I did Iraq, and unfortunately it ended up pretty much more of a NASCAR centric, because we were doing them on the ovals. The drivers were, half of them were from the Cup Series, and we were in their backyard, and so drafting was a big deal. And they do it. I mean, I remember looking in my mirrors at one of the races one time, and the guy's got his arm over the roll bar in the back. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm holding on with both hands.
Dad said that he was on the banking with Earnhardt, and he's just like, the guy's screwing with me. He's just making me lose. He's making me push. And Dad's just got a big old grin on his face, and my dad's holding on as though it's the last thing he's ever going to do.
Yeah, but that was Dale. I mean,
that was Dale.
He was a hoot. He was a hoot and a half, and very talented.
Very talented.
Anyway,
well, let's jump back quickly to '83 when you were with Tyrrell. A year in Formula One. What's your overriding memory of that year? Making it to Formula One, driving with Tyrrell, big brand name in the sport. What's your sort of memory of that time?
Well, I think, remember, that was the start of the turbo era, okay? So some of the cars with the Renault was turbocharged, the BMW was turbocharged, but then there was the McLaren, the Williams, the Tyrrell were still normally aspirated. And so it was one of those deals where it was fun. We were a little underpowered. I had a lot to learn. Ken was great. And I've known Ken, one of the first people I ever knew in racing, because of my mentor, Frank Faulkner. And Michele Alboreto was a super teammate. I knew most of the mechanics because they had been there back when I was a gopher for the team. There was a few new faces, but I knew everything. So it was very comfortable. And again, back to that thing of stepping into a team. But unfortunately, I also, I probably didn't handle it. I was probably a little bit too distracted. I had some stuff going on with Garvin Brown and the racing back in America, and I needed to be a little bit more focused on the thing. So I look at some of them as my own mistakes, but and I think if I had been a better winner, I would have found a way to beat Keke Rosberg in the Race of Champions, where we had that great dice on the last lap. I'm not saying I would have done it, but I just think I could have made, when I look back on it, even when I finished the race, I thought I should have been a little charged a little harder here and there and done a few things different, but that's always in time. But I had that great start from last in Monaco when it was raining. Of course, they didn't do the pit stops the way they do them now. So I started from dead last on slicks in the rain. And I didn't really want to choose that, but Ken Tyrrell said, you're choosing this dries because it's going to stop raining. Those first kind of 22 laps were a little bit hairy, to say the least. I remember Elio De Angelis looking over at me. He was in the JP John Player Special Lotus on the other side, and he looks over at me holding it up, and he goes, "Are you crazy? Is something wrong?" The point at the tires. But it was a great experience, and to come from last to finish fifth I kind of wound up Jonathan Wheatley, the team manager at Red Bull. I said, "So Sergio's starting the same spot as I am. Are you expecting him to finish fifth?" And anyway, it was just kind of fun
times.
But and then one of the best races I had, which I didn't score any points. I would have scored points in the current format, but remember, points only went to sixth place.
Yeah.
And I had to start from the pit lane in South Africa at Kyalami, and I ended up finishing seventh. And that was really a special race because we were normally aspirated. Kyalami's at altitude, so the turbos really had dominance over us. And that was a great drive for me to come back from that and finish seventh in that race. But of course, it didn't score any points. So that makes no difference. Yeah. It was just and something that they had then, which I was going to touch on. That was when we still had qualifying time. Okay,
totally true.
And they were one lap, and on a turbo car, they'd be lucky if they got the whole lap in without chewing up the tires. But they were 5 seconds a lap faster than the B compound. 5 seconds. Think about this. Every corner was one gear higher.
I mean, the car must have handled so differently. What about the braking points? You had to
same thing.
2 gears in your mind, right? You got qualifying mindset, and then you got your race mindset.
And by the way, there's no way to test it. You don't get to practice. We weren't practicing qualifying on qualifying tires, so it was kind of go out and stand on the gas,
Hail Mary and go. Jeez, Danny, that's wild.
Yeah.
Well,
and so, but I see that, and let's not forget that was what cost Villeneuve his life in Belgium.
Yeah.
Because remember, they were saving the tires. They were going so slow, and he was on a fast lap, and I think it was Jochen Mass was slowing down, and because he wasn't going at speed yet. He was trying to save the tires, and Villeneuve ran over his rear.
Yeah, went up. Well, that's kind of a
so it's just so when we're talking about that, that's a concern with the speed differential right now.
Totally.
And what everybody's going through. So I mean, listen, they're all very professional and so far, touch wood, but you just don't want to see that. But anyway, that was a different era.
Yeah, different era, and as you said it was so analog. Once you go by and you saw your pit board, and that was it, you were in silence pretty much for the rest of the lap. Now they know if the driver, shrugs his shoulders in the car, they can feel everything and they can see everything. So and they still have close calls. So it just shows it is still down to human error. Crazy.
But let's not forget too, those cars are 400 pounds heavier than when we raced them, and they're a third longer. A third.
Wild. Yeah, they look like they spread and morphed into the floor, don't they? They're just like fluid almost. That's crazy.
I went to the Ferrari factory when we were flooded out in Imola, and we went over there, just myself and Dennis Dean, to just get a tour of the race shop and so forth. And when you get down next to the car, it's like, oh my gosh, is this thing massive? And yet the gearbox, I think my phone weighs as much as the shell for the gearbox, the casing for the gearbox. I mean, it's just they're in the intricacy and the design and the precision is mind-boggling.
Yeah,
mind-boggling.
You can see where they spend the money, right? You can see it. Anything small and lightweight costs money.
Exactly.
Yeah, crazy.
Welcome to racing.
Well, you mentioned Gilles Villeneuve. Obviously, the next race is at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Canada. A great track, obviously one of the most, isn't it? I think the most visited Formula One tracks, in history. Everybody loves going driving there. I think they've only missed 4 years since the 70s. We saw a lot of upgrades. People doing a lot of work, bringing them into Barcelona. Should have the chance to refine that data and feedback and make across the field, make things better going into Canada. But it'll be I think Red Bull, as we know, will be at the front. But as you say, it's will Aston Martin be able to pull it back? Will Mercedes be able to be as consistent with the two cars? It's going to get very hot for those second, third, fourth, fifth places, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, I think that bunch is almost as competitive as ever.
Yeah.
I think Aston had a little bit. They should have. I thought they were going to be more competitive. Barcelona, they dropped it just a little bit. I was glad to see Lance get it back on track because he had a couple tough races prior to that, just because of having an issue in qualifying. So I think we're going to maybe Max is out there, but I think this track's going to be good. It was interesting. I was talking to a couple people. I'm not going to mention names in Formula One, and I said, "Is there because everybody says, okay, it's the DRS or it's this or it's that," and I said, "What do you think?" I said, "In reality, typical Adrian, he got the whole package right, everything, just all the pieces are put together. So I think it's going to be hard we may see at certain tracks where one of the challengers gets a little closer to Red Bull. We may see if Max has a problem, although he had a problem in qualifying, didn't affect him in the race in Miami. He started 8th. Remember, he had a problem down there, and he ended up starting 8th, but he knifed his way through the field pretty quickly. So I don't think that they have a real weakness right now. The biggest weakness is if they had a mechanical and it dropped them back, which we've seen in the past, and even with the strongest of teams, if they get something like that, somebody starts putting some pressure on them, they make a mistake, they're forced into something. It's a lot easier to make great calls when you're not under pressure.
Yep. That's what I said. They got to be, even if it's a 10-second back in second place, there's pressure applied, right? A bad pit stop, a bad call. So we'll see. It's going to be a fun race. But Danny, it is the 100th running this weekend of the Le Mans 24 Hours. You've done it 4 times. You finished second there. Well, yeah, you finished podium in 1994. Third.
Right.
It's going to be, by all accounts, the most epic Le Mans. It's sold out, 186 drivers. There's 10 ex-Formula One drivers in it. You've got the Garage 56 with Hendricks and the whole of the IMSA crew, John Doonan, everybody behind it, Jim France. It's on every level, including being sold out. It's positioning itself to be the best. Le Mans, what does it mean as a driver to stand on the podium in anyone's career?
Well, for me, Le Mans is maybe the favorite race that I would do in my entire career.
Wow.
It was the ambiance. It was the location. It was the town of Le Mans. It was everything that went with it. It was just one of those, don't misunderstand me. I love Indy, winning it, everything that goes with it, Formula One, all that kind of stuff. But Le Mans is just unique. It's special, and they're all special. Indy special, Monaco special, in their own way. But Le Mans was one that I wish I'd had a better result. And ironically, I did the scrutineering in the town. Remember, it was the Dower Porsches. It was 2 factory cars, and then I got back to the track before the first practice. And Yannick Dalmas and Mauro Baldi and I were in the car, and they were 2 short guys. And I get in the car, and they had locked the seat, couldn't change the seat in the 962. And I told Herr Singer, who was the chief design guy, who was one of the best, and I said, "Look, I can't drive this car for 24 hours. Maybe one stint, maybe, but my knees are jammed up on this." So they took Hurley Haywood, who was driving with Stuck and Boutsen, which are both tall guys, and they put Hurley over in the car. And Hurley, very prophetic, he says, "One of us is going to be very happy." And they won. We finished third. We were leading, and we had a number. We lost about 10 laps through a puncture, and the bodywork came, different things. But it was just a special time. And, and also I drove for them. I drove for Jaguar. I drove for Bugatti with the BMW, the McLaren BMW factory car, with PK and Johnny Ciccato. And so I drove a Ferrari. It was always a special experience for me. And I'm envious of everybody going. You in particular, you guys are going to have a great time. It's going to be just phenomenal.
Yeah,
phenomenal.
I'm excited.
I'll be glued to the TV. Trust me.
I'm excited to see the hypercars. For everyone watching who follows Formula One, in sports cars, they've come up with this hypercar, LMDH as we call it, category, which is perhaps the best unification of worldwide sports car rules ever. And it's allowed them to bring these hybrid technology to sports cars. And Danny, the pace of these cars, arguably the closest to Formula One that a sports car's ever been, with the technology and, Toyota, Peugeot, Cadillac, Glickenhaus. And I'm excited to see the Ferrari. we're seeing this elevation of technology across the board, not just in Formula One, but to see those cars running there, and it's a sprint now. There is no mechanical drop off, right? They just go flat out.
In that BRDC lunch that I mentioned earlier, right across from him was Brendan Hartley. Mm-hmm. And, we had a long talk about it. He said, and I said, well, power-wise, and he said, it is so, he said, if you get too far in front, they regulate the power and they can monitor it through each wheel. So nobody can, all of a sudden, nobody's got a stronger engine. They can have a stronger package in certain areas. But he said the rules are very, very tight. And I think that's one of the things that's special too, is it's keeping it close, but it's allowing them all to push the envelope in some other areas. I think it's going to be fabulous. I asked Brendan which one he thought was the biggest threat for them, because obviously Toyota's got a leg up on everybody, having been doing it for longer. And he thought that the Ferrari was the most advanced. He thought Porsche was struggling a little bit. He said Peugeot was way out, but I think they've made some gains. Cadillac was strong. I mean, look at us. We're just talking through all these names.
Yeah, I know.
And all these manufacturers. I think it's going to be. I'm so jealous of you going over, and everybody that's going. I was with Stefan Johansson recently down in Miami. He's going obviously as a past winner. Yeah. So it's going to be exciting. I've got to do something. Justin, as always, I'd like a rain check, but I've got a dog, and the vets are just about to show up to give her a shot. She likes Dad to be there and help her with the.
Well, Danny, I've heard people say, that blame it on a friend, but if you want to blame it on the vet, you can go for your procedure.
No, my dog's is just such a big part of Brenda's my life, and
you got to do it.
So we. Yeah.
Well, before you jump, will you be steward at the Vegas race?
No, believe it or not, I'll probably be there, but we're doing some extracurricular stuff. But the way it works is we put in not our request, but what our availability is at the beginning of the year, and then they pick it out. It's picked by the president, and he says, okay, these guys here, these guys there. And, you kind of get it. And sometimes you trade it around a little bit, because there is a conflict of interest will come up, and I'll trade somebody for one to another. But that's how it works.
Well, hopefully week of Vegas Grand Prix, you can come and see me in here, and we can do this in person. All right.
I'd like to do that. Look forward to it.
Take care, buddy.
Good luck at Le Mans. Best all the family. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks a lot, man. See you later. Bye. Well, always great to talk to Danny, and it just shows ex-race drivers, once it's in the blood, and especially being able to be so close to it as a steward. That was very insightful. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Well, it is in a little break for Formula One, the weekend off. It is the 100th running of the Le Mans 24 Hours, and I will be there. I leave to Paris right after this show. But let's talk about the Las Vegas race. Some great online content coming out right now. EA Sports just revealed a preview of their EA Sports F1 23, and it's set on the streets of Las Vegas, and it really was the first insight that we've had into what it'll look like. And just look at those graphics; it's unbelievable. They actually 3D scan using drones to get all the buildings right. And we're joining one of the McLarens on the front straight there. Some of the Vegas landmarks going by. You can see it's just unbelievable as you see the MSG Sphere, you see the casinos. This is going to be something special. I actually can't wait to play this, drive, or whatever you call it. And the release date is June 16th, which is next Friday. Just look at the quality level. Maybe we're not a high-paid Formula One driver, but we can give it a shot on EA Sports. So everybody get out there. We've got the chance to know the track as well as the actual drivers do before they turn up for first practice. Anyway, a great weekend of racing just gone. A huge one at Le Mans coming up. And we'll see you next week when I have the one, the only Mario Andretti joining me on Drive to Win. And of course, talking about the win, go to winlasvegas.com/experiences/F1 and see how you can come a part of the inaugural Grand Prix later in the year. Guys, have a great time this week, and I'll see you next week.